The sound of boots marching in formation echoed across Meadowbrook Elementary's playground. At exactly 3:47 p.m., on a Tuesday afternoon, that would forever change the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willowcrest. Children scattered like startled birds, as 6 uniformed security guards in tactical gear surrounded the swing sets and soccer field, their radios crackling with urgent commands. All units, secure the perimeter. We have a code red situation in progress. The voice belonged to Security Chief Marcus Webb, a man whose military background had somehow convinced him that a playground scuffle between 2 8-year-old boys constituted a riot worthy of martial law. Just 20 minutes earlier, the afternoon had been perfectly ordinary. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the grass as children poured out of the school buses, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders as they raced toward the playground. Soccer balls flew through the air, jump ropes slapped against concrete, and the monkey bars rang with the laughter of children testing their strength against gravity. Maria Santos stood at the edge of the field, watching her son Diego weave between defenders with the grace of a seasoned athlete, his dark hair catching the golden light as he dribbled toward the goal. "Mom, watch this," Diego called out, his voice bright with excitement as he approached the penalty area. The other children gathered around, their faces flushed with the exertion of play, their eyes following the ball as it rolled across the worn grass. This was the magic hour, when homework was forgotten and the world narrowed to the simple joy of movement and competition. The collision happened in slow motion. Diego and Tommy Mitchell, a freckled boy with sandy hair and a competitive streak, both reached for the ball at the same moment. Their shoulders bumped, sending them tumbling into the grass in a tangle of limbs and surprised shouts. For a moment, they lay there, blinking at the sky, more startled than hurt. Then Tommy scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment. "You did that on purpose." Tommy's voice cracked with the indignation that only an 8-year-old could muster. His hands clenched into small fists at his sides, grass stains decorating his khaki shorts. Diego pushed himself up, brushing dirt from his jersey. "I did not. You ran into me." His dark eyes flashed with frustration, the competitive fire that served him well on the soccer field, now directed at his playground adversary. The other children formed a loose circle around them, their voices rising in a chorus of "Fight, fight, fight," that was more theatrical than serious. This was playground politics at its most basic level, a momentary clash of wills that would be forgotten by dinner time. Maria Santos started walking toward the group, her motherly instincts already calculating the best way to diffuse the situation with minimal drama. But Karen Mitchell had other plans. From her position on the park bench, where she'd been scrolling through her phone while half watching the children play, she launched herself into motion with the righteous fury of a woman who'd finally found her moment. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the afternoon breeze as she marched across the playground, her designer sneakers clicking against the pavement with military precision. "Get away from my son." Karen's voice cut through the children's chatter like a blade, causing several of them to step back in surprise. She positioned herself between Tommy and Diego, her arms spread wide as if shielding her child from mortal danger. "This is assault. This is battery. I'm calling the police." Maria Santos quickened her pace, her heart sinking as she recognized the telltale signs of a Karen Mitchell meltdown. As the newly elected president of the Willowcrest Homeowners Association, Karen had transformed every minor neighborhood dispute into a federal case, wielding her gavel like a weapon against anyone who dared to challenge her vision of suburban perfection. "Mrs. Mitchell, they're just playing," Maria said, her voice calm and reasonable as she approached the group. "Boys will be boys. No one got hurt." Karen whirled around, her face flushed with the kind of manufactured outrage that had become her trademark. Playing your son attacked my child. This is gang violence. This is what happens when we let certain elements into our community." The words hung in the air like poison, their implications crystal clear to every parent within earshot. The playground fell silent. Even the children sensed the shift in atmosphere, their innocent game forgotten in the face of adult anger. Diego looked up at his mother with confusion in his eyes, not understanding why a simple playground collision had suddenly become something much darker and more complicated. Certain elements. Maria's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on Diego's shoulders. "What exactly do you mean by that, Karen?" Karen's phone was already pressed to her ear, her fingers flying across the screen as she activated the HOA's emergency alert system. 911. "Yes, I need police and security immediately. There's a riot in progress at Meadowbrook Elementary Playground. Multiple perpetrators. Send backup." Her voice rose to a near shriek, causing several children to burst into tears. A riot. Maria stared at Karen in disbelief. Two children bumped into each other playing soccer. That's not a riot. That's childhood. But Karen was already in full crisis mode, her phone buzzing with responses from the HOA board members and the private security company that she'd hired 6 months earlier, despite numerous resident complaints about the cost. "This is exactly what I warned everyone about at the last board meeting. Give them an inch, and they'll take a mile. Well, not in my neighborhood. Not on my watch." The first security vehicle arrived within minutes, its sirens wailing as it screeched to a halt at the playground's entrance. Chief Webb emerged from the passenger seat, his military bearing evident in every step as he surveyed the scene. His eyes swept over the cluster of parents and children, his expression hardening as he spotted Maria and Diego. "Mrs. Mitchell, what's the situation?" Webb's voice carried the clipped authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His hand rested casually on the radio clipped to his tactical vest, ready to call for additional units if necessary. "Gang violence. Chief Webb. Organized assault on a minor. I want them arrested and charged to the full extent of the law." Karen pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Diego, who pressed closer to his mother's side, his earlier confidence evaporating in the face of adult hostility. Webb's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene. Two crying children, a handful of concerned parents, and a woman whose dramatic gestures suggested she was auditioning for a role in a disaster movie. But Karen Mitchell signed his paychecks, and her vision of neighborhood security aligned perfectly with his own belief that authority should be absolute and unquestioned. "Ma'am, I need you and your son to step away from the other children," Webb said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "We're implementing emergency protocols until this situation is resolved." Emergency protocols. Maria's voice rose in disbelief. "For what two kids playing soccer?" "For public safety. Ma'am, stand down." Webb's radio crackled to life as additional units arrived, their vehicles forming a perimeter around the playground. The afternoon sun glinted off their tactical gear, creating a surreal tableau of military precision in a place designed for children's laughter. By 4 o'clock, the scene had escalated beyond all reason. 6 security vehicles surrounded the playground, their red and blue lights flashing in a hypnotic pattern that drew curious onlookers from across the neighborhood. Parents arriving to pick up their children found themselves faced with uniformed guards who demanded identification and questioned their business in the area. "I'm sorry, sir, but this area is under security lockdown," one guard informed Bob Thompson, whose daughter Emma was trapped on the far side of the playground. "No civilian access until the situation is resolved." Situation. "What situation?" "I just want to pick up my kid." Bob's voice carried the frustrated bewilderment of a man trying to navigate a bureaucratic nightmare that had materialized out of thin air. "She's 8 years old, for crying out loud." The guards remained unmoved, their faces hidden behind reflective sunglasses that gave them an robotic appearance. Behind them, children pressed against the chain-link fence, their faces streaked with tears as they watched their parents being turned away by armed security personnel. Karen Mitchell stood at the center of it all, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated the response with the efficiency of a military commander. "Yes, I need the streets blocked off. Pine Street, Maple Avenue, and Oak Drive. No, I don't care about traffic. This is a matter of public safety." The roadblocks went up at 4:30 p.m., creating a maze of detours that trapped residents in their own neighborhood. School buses were forced to reroute, leaving children stranded at stops they'd never seen before. Emergency vehicles found themselves caught in the confusion, their sirens adding to the cacophony of chaos that had descended upon the previously peaceful community. "This is insane," muttered Janet Rodriguez, a nurse who'd been trying to get home from her shift at the hospital for the past 20 minutes. "What kind of emergency requires blocking off half the neighborhood?" The answer came at 5:15 p.m. when Chief Webb announced the implementation of an emergency curfew over the HOA's emergency alert system. His voice echoed from every smartphone in the neighborhood, carrying the weight of martial authority into living rooms and kitchens, where families were trying to make sense of the chaos outside their windows. "Attention! Willowcrest residents. Due to ongoing security concerns, a neighborhood curfew is now in effect. All residents must remain indoors until further notice. Any violation of this order will result in immediate detention and prosecution. This is not a drill." The message repeated every 15 minutes, its mechanical cadence creating an atmosphere of siege warfare in a place where the biggest previous crisis had been a dispute over lawn gnome regulations. Windows curtains twitched as residents peered out at the security patrols marching through their streets, their boots echoing against the pavement with military precision. Inside the Santos home, Maria sat with Diego on the living room couch, trying to explain why they couldn't go outside, even though the sun was still shining and the playground was visible from their window. "It's like a game, mijo. The security guards are playing pretend, and we have to stay inside until they're done." "But I didn't do anything wrong. Mama, Tommy and I were just playing soccer." Diego's voice carried the bewildered innocence of a child, trying to understand why the adult world had suddenly turned hostile and incomprehensible. "I know, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and other grown-ups have to fix them." Maria's voice remained calm and reassuring, but her hands shook as she reached for her phone to call her husband. This had gone far beyond a simple playground dispute. This was something much darker, much more dangerous. Across town, City Attorney Rebecca Chen was working late in her office when her phone began buzzing with calls from confused residents. The first few calls seemed like pranks or misunderstandings, but as the reports poured in, a pattern emerged that made her blood run cold. "Ma'am, they won't let me leave my house to walk my dog. They say it's martial law. But I thought only the military could declare martial law." The voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman whose confusion was evident in every word. Rebecca's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up the municipal codes and federal regulations governing emergency powers. What she found made her stomach drop. A private security company had no legal authority to declare martial law, impose curfews, or restrict the movement of citizens. What was happening in Willowcrest wasn't just an overreaction. It was a clear violation of constitutional rights. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to document everything. Take photos, record conversations, get names and badge numbers. This is completely illegal, and I'm going to put a stop to it right now." Rebecca's voice carried the steel of someone who'd spent years fighting for civil rights and wasn't about to let a power-hungry HOA president turn her city into a police state. She grabbed her briefcase and headed for the door, her mind already formulating the legal arguments she'd need to dismantle this amateur dictatorship. As she drove through the chaos of rerouted traffic and confused residents, she couldn't help but wonder how a simple playground incident had escalated into something that belonged in a dystopian novel, rather than a suburban neighborhood. The answer lay in the toxic combination of unchecked authority, racial prejudice, and a security chief who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with overwhelming force. Karen Mitchell had found the perfect storm of circumstances to implement her vision of a controlled, sanitized community where people like the Santos family knew their place and stayed in it. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that the residents of Willowcrest would accept her authoritarian measures without question, that they'd trade their freedom for the illusion of safety. She'd forgotten that Americans, regardless of their political affiliation or background, possessed a deep-seated resistance to tyranny that could be pushed only so far before it pushed back. The first crack in her facade of control appeared at 6:30 p.m., when Rebecca Chen's black sedan pulled up to the main roadblock on Pine Street. The city attorney emerged from her car with the confident bearing of someone who wielded real authority, not the manufactured kind that Karen Mitchell had wrapped around herself like a security blanket. "I'm City Attorney Rebecca Chen, and I'm ordering you to remove these barricades immediately," she announced, her voice carrying across the intersection like a bell of liberation. "You have no legal authority to restrict the movement of citizens, and every minute you continue this charade puts your organization at risk for massive civil rights violations." The security guards exchanged uncertain glances, their confident facade cracking in the face of actual legal authority. Chief Webb materialized from one of the vehicles, his tactical gear looking suddenly ridiculous in the presence of someone who understood the actual law rather than just the appearance of it. "Ma'am, we're operating under emergency protocols authorized by the Homeowners Association. This is a private security matter." Webb's voice carried less conviction than before, the first sign that his carefully constructed authority was beginning to crumble. "Private security has no authority to declare martial law, impose curfews, or restrict access to public streets. What you're doing is false imprisonment, a federal crime that carries serious penalties." Rebecca's words cut through the evening air like a sword, each syllable precise and devastating. "Remove these barriers now, or I'll have every one of your officers arrested for civil rights violations." The standoff that followed lasted exactly 17 minutes, during which time the gathered crowd of residents grew from a handful of curious onlookers to a sea of angry faces demanding answers. Parents held signs reading, "Free our children," and "End HOA tyranny." Someone had brought a megaphone, and chants of "Take down the barriers" echoed off the surrounding houses. Karen Mitchell arrived on the scene like a general inspecting her troops, her perfectly styled hair now showing signs of stress as she surveyed the growing crowd of protesters. "Chief Webb, why haven't these people been dispersed? The curfew is still in effect." "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm afraid your curfew is illegal and unenforceable," Rebecca Chen said, stepping forward with the calm authority of someone who'd spent years dealing with petty tyrants. "As city attorney, I'm ordering the immediate cessation of all security operations and the restoration of normal access to public areas." "You have no authority here. This is a private community with private security. We make our own rules." Karen's voice rose to a near shriek, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking under the pressure of actual legal opposition. Ma'am, the streets are public, the playground is public, and the constitutional rights of these residents are protected by federal law. Your HOA agreement doesn't supersede the Constitution. Rebecca's response was delivered with the kind of calm precision that only came from years of courtroom experience. Continue this illegal operation, and I'll seek criminal charges against every person involved. The moment of truth came when Channel 7 News arrived, their satellite truck pulling up just as the argument reached its crescendo. Reporter Sarah Martinez emerged with her camera crew, immediately recognizing the magnitude of the story unfolding before her. An HOA declaring martial law over a playground incident was the kind of absurd yet serious news that would dominate the evening broadcast. This is Sarah Martinez reporting live from Willowcrest, where an unprecedented situation has unfolded. Private security forces have imposed what they're calling martial law over a minor incident involving two children playing soccer. Her voice carried the professional authority of someone who'd covered real emergencies and recognized the difference between genuine crisis and manufactured drama. The camera panned across the scene, capturing the absurdity of armed guards surrounding a playground, the barriers blocking public streets, and the growing crowd of residents demanding their freedom. In the background, children could be seen pressed against windows, their faces reflecting the confusion and fear that had replaced their afternoon of innocent play. I'm joined now by City Attorney Rebecca Chen, who has declared the security operation illegal. Ms. Chen, can you explain what's happening here? Sarah's question cut through the chaos like a lifeline, offering the community's first real opportunity to have their side of the story told. What we're seeing is a clear violation of constitutional rights by individuals who have no legal authority to restrict the movement of citizens. A private security company cannot declare martial law, cannot impose curfews, and cannot prevent people from accessing public streets and facilities. Rebecca's response was measured and precise, each word calculated to dismantle the legal fiction that Karen Mitchell had constructed around her authoritarian fantasy. The live broadcast triggered an immediate response from viewers across the city, their phones lighting up the station's switchboard with calls of outrage and support. Social media exploded with hashtags like Jua Willowcrest Martial Law and Juai Hodi Rani, spreading the story across the internet with the viral intensity that only comes from witnessing injustice in real time. Faced with the harsh glare of media scrutiny and the clear legal opposition of the city attorney, Chief Webb's resolve finally cracked. All units, stand down, remove the barriers, and return to base. His voice carried the defeat of someone who'd finally encountered an authority greater than his own manufactured power. The barriers came down at 7:45 p.m., their removal greeted by cheers from the assembled crowd of residents. Children emerged from their houses like flowers blooming after a storm, running toward their parents with the kind of joy that only comes from unexpected freedom. The playground, which had been transformed into a militarized zone, gradually returned to its intended purpose as families reclaimed their community space. But the story was far from over. As the security vehicles departed and the crowd began to disperse, the real work of accountability was just beginning. Rebecca Chen gathered statements from affected residents, documenting the violations of civil rights that had occurred during the afternoon of manufactured crisis. Each testimony added another layer to the legal case she was building against the HOA and its security contractor. They wouldn't let me pick up my daughter from school. Said I needed special permission to enter my own neighborhood. Bob Thompson's voice carried the righteous anger of a parent who'd been denied access to his child for no legitimate reason. I'm a nurse. I was trying to get home from the hospital, and they made me sit in traffic for an hour because they'd blocked off the streets. What if there had been a real emergency? Janet Rodriguez's testimony highlighted the dangerous consequences of the security overreach, the way it had interfered with essential services and public safety. Maria Santos stood with Diego at the edge of the playground, watching as the normal rhythms of neighborhood life slowly resumed. "What happens now?" she asked Rebecca, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd spent the afternoon defending her family's right to exist peacefully in their own community. "Now we make sure this never happens again. We're going to file a class action lawsuit against the HOA and their security company. Civil rights violations, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. They're going to learn that constitutional rights aren't negotiable." Rebecca's response carried the iron certainty of someone who'd spent her career fighting for justice and wasn't about to let this assault on civil liberties go unanswered. The legal proceedings that followed would become a landmark case in HOA law, establishing clear precedents about the limits of private authority and the protection of constitutional rights within residential communities. Karen Mitchell, faced with the prospect of personal liability for her role in the illegal operation, resigned from the HOA board in disgrace. Chief Webb's security company lost its license and faced criminal charges for their participation in the civil rights violations. But the most important outcome was the transformation of the Willowcrest community itself. The shared experience of resistance had forged bonds between neighbors who had previously been strangers, creating a network of mutual support that extended far beyond the legal victory. The playground became a symbol not just of children's freedom to play, but of the community's determination to protect the rights and dignity of all its residents. 6 months later, Maria Santos stood in the same spot where she'd watched her son play soccer on that fateful afternoon. The playground had been renovated with funds from the legal settlement, its new equipment gleaming in the afternoon sun. Children raced across the grass with the unself-conscious joy of those who'd never known their laughter could be criminalized, their voices creating a symphony of freedom that would never again be silenced by the forces of manufactured fear. Diego dribbled his soccer ball toward the goal, his movements fluid and confident as he prepared to take his shot. The other children gathered around, their faces bright with anticipation, their voices rising in encouragement. This was childhood, as it should be, uninhibited, joyful, and protected by adults who understood that the most important security came not from walls and guards, but from the strength of a community that stood together against those who would divide it. Goal. Diego's shout of triumph echoed across the playground, a sound that carried all the sweetness of victory earned through struggle and defended through courage. The ball sailed past the makeshift goalposts and into the net, scoring not just a point in a children's game, but a lasting victory for the principles of justice and human dignity that had been tested and proven strong enough to withstand the assault of petty tyranny. The evening news that night would focus on other stories: political scandals, economic reports, international conflicts, but in Willowcrest, the real news was the sound of children playing freely in their neighborhood, protected by the knowledge that their community would never again allow fear to triumph over freedom, or authority to go unchallenged when it overstepped the bounds of justice and humanity. As the sun set over the playground, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Maria Santos smiled as she watched her son's laughter blend with the voices of his friends. This was the sound of democracy in action, the music of a community that had learned to stand together against those who would silence it. In the end, that was the most important victory of all, not the legal judgment or the financial settlement, but the knowledge that when freedom was threatened, ordinary people had found the courage to defend it. The playground would remain a symbol of that courage for generations to come, a reminder that the price of liberty was eternal vigilance, and that the most powerful force in any community was not the authority of those who claimed to rule it, but the united voice of those who refuse to be ruled by fear. In Willowcrest, the children would always be free to play, and their laughter would always be the sound of victory over those who would make it a crime.